The people began to despair. There was no more dancing, there was no more singing. Their faces were long with worry. The king then calls for the wisest men and women from across the land, and they talked for days and days, but none of them could make a decision of how to rid themselves of this horrible, cruel creature. And all the while, the fire began to rain, continued to rain down on the land. And people feared that soon there would be no trees, and therefore no place for all the creatures to live and survive. But this young girl that I told you at the start of the story, she decided to approach the castle and ask to meet with the king. She claimed she had a great idea to rid them of the dragon. Of course, the guards laughed at her. How could such a young girl solve such a huge problem that had baffled the oldest and wisest in the land? But nonetheless, they let her through. The girl's stomach churned with butterflies. She entered the great hall, and everyone turned to look at what she would have to say. She whispered to the king her intentions and her plan. The king nodded and smiled. He sent away his best archers and warriors to the top of the highest hills in the land. And then he sent messengers to every corner of the kingdom. He instructed and ordered them to take all the young animals from their mothers, the lambs from the ewes, the fowls from the mares, the calves from the cows, the kids from the nanny goats, and the chicks from the hens, the ducklings from the ducks. And all the young creatures were taken. They were taken and they were separated by a huge gorge where they could see, but impossible to reach their mothers, and the mothers to protect their young. Can you imagine what happened next? That's right. The animals began to cry, the lambs bleated, the foals neighed, the chicks peeped, the calves mooed, the ducklings quacked, and the human babies even wailed. And high, high up in the sky, hidden beneath this dark cloud, the dragon heard this deafening sound. He of course considered himself to be the most terrifying beast in all the land. Yet in all these days he'd never heard anything so murdering and destructive as this horrible, deafening sound of these miserable creatures down below. As he listened to the cries, the dragon even began to feel afraid. He began to imagine that perhaps in the sky above, something larger, more ferocious or terrifying than him would attack. He couldn't understand what could be making such a deafening racket. And slowly the dragon began to lower himself, lower and lower towards the land, perhaps to find a safe cave or cavern in which to hide himself. And slowly and cautiously he stuck his head below the cloud, and then his neck, and then his chest. And then waiting down below were the archers and the best spearsmen in the land. They threw and launched their spears and pointed their arrows, darted their arrows squarely at his chest. They struck his heart, and with an almighty roar, this enormous beast plunged towards the ground, creating an enormous crater in the earth. And that was the end of the dragon. The people rejoiced, the animals and the babies were reunited with their mothers, and all was well once again. And Bride ruled the land. And this was how the Caledonian pine forest was saved. I hope you enjoyed the story.